Hello everyone, peace be upon you all. Welcome to the fourth stream where we read this book, the Shīʿa in Iraqi Heresiography. We are still in chapter 1 about the book. We have finished section 1, heresiographies as historical sources, aims, 3, structure, 4, methodology, and 5, state of the field, and we are going to start section 6 and subsection 1 specifically, which says section 6 is terminology and categories. Subsection 1 is heresiography and doxography. In Arabic they are firaq books and maqalat books. What is heresiography? It is a book or the science of heresies. You collect heresies, number them, list them, and talk about the doctrines and criticize them. Doxography is the science, is a historical science which talks about, as I believe, this is at least according to my knowledge. Doxography talks about the beliefs and doctrines of certain people. But firaq books are not really heresiographies, because within the firaq books they include the firaq means sects, so the books of sects, they include the sect of the writer. The writer includes his own sect within the book, so he does not consider the list to be a list of heresies, but a list of sects including his own, and he does not, and they do not include criticisms. Maqalat books is more specific. It talks about individuals rather than instead of sects. Sometimes they are the same. Sometimes within firaq books they would consider a single person to be a sect, or a very small group, a teacher and his students. So there is overlap between firaq books and maqalat books. Anyway, let's start reading. Van S uses, sorry about the bird, she is eating herself. I have no idea why. Don't eat yourself. I searched online for the reason why she eats herself. They said it's a psychological problem, which is strange how birds have psychological or mental problems. They say it could be a physical problem like chronic itching. So she used to bite herself so hard that she started bleeding. She bites the under her wing, her what's it called? The I don't know how to say it in English, but the place under the shoulder where hair grows. It's at the tip of my tongue, but I'm struggling to remember it. Armpit. Yes, armpit. She is eating her wing pit. So hot. May God alleviate her pain and ease her life and cure her. I have no idea how to cure her. The doctor, the vet doesn't really care about birds. He cares only about cats and dogs. I gave him my bird before who broke his wing, and he didn't do anything to it. He just left it. So careless. So unfortunate. Anyway, let's get back to our book. I cannot today I get the birds out of the cage. So I get them out of the cage one day, and one day I keep them in the cage so that I put them outside. So today is the day where they roam free in the room, and I am with them in the room, and the computer is in the room, so we have to what's it called? Withstand. We have to withstand the noise, their noisy voices, their screams and chirping and singing. I am sorry about that, but it's a nice background, I hope. Background noise. Anyway, Van S uses the term heresiography with some hesitation. As he says, it has become well established in the discipline, and he wants to avoid bolstering the impression that scholars in the humanities just make words for the sake of it by constantly quibbling over terms. Heresiography is used in the study too, notably in the title, and for much the same reason. A book's title should give its most likely reader some idea of the subject matter. Often, however, individual works will be referred to as doxographies, and passages of text sometimes as doxographical. Category terms derived from Arabic, such as maqalat books and firaq books, also appear. Despite the desire to follow Van S and avoid superficial concerns about labels, this all deserves a short note by way of explanation. A potential problem with heresiography is the implied notion of heresy, a term developed and used in Christian contexts to denote several interrelated concepts. There is something of a debate about its use in Islamic studies. One aspect concerns whether there is any analytical concept labeled heresy that is useful in the ethic study of Islam generally. What is in the ethic? What is ethic? Ethic meaning relating to or denoting an approach to the study or description of a particular language or culture that is general, non-structural, and objective in its perspective. In other words, it's the anthropological study of Islam. Sorry. Another related to it is about whether heresy is a suitable translation of any emic term. What is emic? In our anthropology, in anthropology, in anthropology, folkloristics, linguistics, and the social and behavioral study. One moment, let me show you what I'm reading. One second. Window capture. Create new. Select window. Which one? The emic ethic. Yes, here it is. In anthropology, folkloristics, linguistics, and the social and behavioral sciences, emic and ethic, emic and ethic, refer to two kinds of field research done and viewpoints obtained. 1 second, let me cough a little. Okay, I'm done. The emic approach is an insider perspective which looks at the beliefs, values, and practices of a culture from the perspective of the people who live within that culture. This approach aims to understand the cultural meaning and significance of a particular behavior or practice as it is understood by the people who engage in it. The ethic approach, on the other hand, is an outsider's perspective, which looks at a culture from the perspective of an outside observer or researcher. This approach tends to focus on the observable behaviors and practices of a culture and aims to understand them in terms of their functional or evolutionary significance. The ethic approach often involves the use of standardized measures and frameworks to compare different cultures and may involve the use of concepts and theories from other disciplines such as psychology and sociology. The emic and ethic approaches each have their own strengths and limitations, and each can be useful in understanding different aspects of culture and behavior. Some anthropologists argue that a combination of both approaches is necessary for a complete understanding of a culture, while others argue that one approach may be appropriate depending on the specific research question being addressed. What do you think? What do you think? Adobe. I don't know. Let me think for a minute. I believe the ethic approach is better. I believe the ethic approach is better. Let's continue. Let's repeat the sentence. One aspect concerns whether there is any analytical concept labeled heresy that is useful in the ethic study of Islam generally. Another related to it is about whether heresy is a suitable translation of any Islamic term used historically by Muslim scholars in their various languages. Is there such a thing as sectology? There is no, it's not a widely used term, but it is possible to use it. Sectology is the best term for the firaq books. As for the maqalat books, let's see how to translate maqalat. Arabic, English. Maqalat. مقالة. قول. What is dysphasia? Impairment in the production speed resulting in a brain damage. Okay. Parole. Define. The actual linguistic being contrast with linguist. I'm thinking of call it parology. Not payroll. Parole. What's the science of doctrines? Doxography. What does doxography mean? An opinion, a point of view. To write, to describe them, especially works classically describing the points of view of past philosophers and scientists. Okay, that's cool. Doxography is perfect. Doxography is a perfect translation of the term maqalat books. Heresiography, on the other hand, is not accurate for the firaq books. So we can say we have sectology and doxography. Okay, let's continue. Where were we? Here. Okay, not much is to be gained by becoming embroiled in these debates here. The sense in which heresy is invoked in heresiography is certainly conceptually too vague and analytically too flat for the serious study of the phenomena the heresiographers describe, but it is also relatively tame. The point is just that an Islamic heresiography is a text that predominantly describes Islamic groups whose beliefs are considered false in some way by its Muslim author. The beliefs are not always considered false in the same way, and the various authors of heresiographies would have disagreed over which term in Arabic express the different degrees of falseness, and over what the real world consequences of holding such false beliefs should be. They would also sometimes have used I have lost concentration. I've not internalized this sentence. The beliefs are not always considered false in the same way, and the various authors of heresiographies would have disagreed over which terms in Arabic expressed the different degrees of falseness, and over what the real world consequences of holding such false beliefs should be. They would also sometimes have used one and the same term in different ways, partly accounting for the disagreements. They would also sometimes have used one and the same term in different ways, partly accounting for the disagreements. Still, as long as one does not assume that some highly specific concept of heresy from Christian history is invoked, the vagueness of the label heresiography need not be an obstacle to a more nuanced understanding of the concepts employed by the individual authors. There is another potentially more serious question. Regardless of the underlying concept of heresy, is heresiography a coherent category of literary analysis? Watt seems to have understood it to be a radial category. What does radial mean? Yikes. Of or arranged like rays of the radii or the radii of a circle diverging in lines from a common center relating to radius, or radial artery, the main artery, geometric term of location. Vector line, radius, adjective form of radius, radial distance, plural, radial set, radial artery, main artery of the lateral aspect of the forearm. Supplies the radial supplies the posterior portion of the upper limb. In what way does she mean to say radius? Let's see. At its core are mature works like Shahrastani's Milal and Baghdadi's Farq, which are taken to be prototypical of the genre. Texts are then labeled heresiographies because they are similar in different ways and to different extents to the prototypes. One issue here is that even the core works differ considerably in form, scope, and apparent intent from one another. Indeed, the ways they are concerned with the then concept of heresy justifying differ substantially. Shahrastani, they are fighting, the birds are fighting on my head. Who should sit on it? Shahrastani almost exclusively surveys confessional differences within Islam and beyond in apparently neutral terms. Many of the beliefs he describes must have been false in his view, and naturally he observes things from a certain perspective, but the categorizing of false beliefs as to the degree of falseness is not an explicit feature of his text. For Baghdadi, on the other hand, it is the whole point. He wants to draw lines not only between belief and unbelief, but also between correct belief and the various kinds of doctrinal innovation, bid'ah, present amongst the 72 errant factions of the Muslim community. Once you start to build a radial category around these prototypes, a large number. What's wrong with my throat? Am I sick? Did I get a cold? I don't think so. Strange. Once you start to build a radial category around these prototypes, a large number of quite heterogeneous works can quickly fall within it. Some do so for genetic reasons, i.e. because they share textual material, even if they do something quite different with it. Some simply because they describe the doctrine of at least one faction of Islam, even if only for the purpose of constructing a refutation. Thus we end up with a situation where both Ibn Hanbal's رد على الجهمية والزنادقة. By the way, I have made a video where I read an article demonstrating that this work is not by Ibn Hanbal. Check it out. And several works of Jahil have also been labeled heresiographies, although heresiography is not the dominant mode and they have very little in common formally with works like the Milal and the Farq. This quickly becomes too unwieldy. I have a question. What did the Jahil write exactly? Let's continue. Despite the problems, the term heresiography will be used here, but not to refer to a category with this kind of radial structure. Rather, it denotes in general and customary sense texts that focus primarily on cataloging numerous factions and or beliefs apparently deemed false by the author. But we also need more precise concepts and terminology. Sorry, I have no idea what's wrong with my throat. Apparently deemed false by the author, but we also need more precise concepts and terminology. A more helpful approach has been advanced by Claudi Gio or Giulio or Gilliot, I have no idea how to pronounce his name, who observed that the texts we label heresiographies belong to different genres of writing. Sticking more closely to the relevant Arabic terms, Giulio categorized heresiographies into three groups: Firaq books, Maqalat books, and Milal wa Nihal books. Of course, that is not the only possible classification. Nevertheless, Gilead's division is useful insofar as it takes account of the fact that heresiographies consist in various text types. With distinct formal characteristics. So, in my opinion, it's best to say علم الفرق, the science of sects, or sectology. He calls it heresiography. the science of heresies, but I prefer calling it the science of sects, sectology. And we have maqalat books, which talks about the views or opinions of individuals, philosophers or theologians. And it's called in English doxography. Milal wa Nihal books. This is difficult to classify, to translate. What would we call this? Where can I find this book PDF? It's found open access on the website of the Gruyta. I'll send you the link. Gruyta. You can download it EPUB or PDF. The structure and transmission of the material up to al-Ashʿarī, Abu Hassan al-Ashʿarī. In this study, I think we should call "You're welcome." We should call Milal wa Nihal books as Milalology. Milalology. What do you think? Milalology or milology? Milalology. Milalogy. What do you think? So we have sectology, doxography, and milology. Or nihalogy. Milalogy or nihalogy. What's better? In this study, there will be no need to deal with the Milal wa Nihal category, as these works emerged later. Milalogy. Now it's going to be written like this. Milalogy. Like this. Milalogy. Or milalogia. Better. Milalogia. Milalogia. In this study, sorry, let me cough a little. I'm gonna mute. Okay, let's continue. In the study, there will be no milalogy, milology or milology, milalogy, Milalogy. The milalogy is the science of religions. It not in the way of studying the religion in its details, but listing the religions and studying them in a very concise manner. For example, what's common between all Muslims? What's common between all Christians? What's common between all Jews? What's common between all Buddhists? And the major, I think we should also mention the biggest sects of each religion. Not all the sects, because that's too difficult. That would be a huge book, an encyclopedia, but rather a very brief description of each religion. Milalogy. So in the study, this book that we are reading right now is not about milalogy. It is about sectology, which Weaver calls heresiography. So the distinction between firaq books and maqalat books is helpful and will be employed throughout. Gilead did not invent it as such. It is partly rooted in actors' categories. The concept of the maqalat book, literally Book of Doctrines, has a long history. Mas'udi, who died in 345, recognizes such works as belonging to a distinct category when he writes of those theologians of Islam, both the authors of maqalat books, أصحاب الكتب في المقالات, and those who direct refutations against this group. Later, he even introduces a list of the authors of such works in similar terms. The theologians of the factions of Islam who have preceded us, from the Mu'tazila, the Shīʿa, the Murji'a, the Khawarij, and the Nabita, have composed maqalat books, كتبا في المقالات, such as so and so. Okay. If you have any question, make sure to ask. Ash'arī already understood his own maqalat book as part of a tradition when he criticized anonymous predecessors who had done a bad job of presenting doctrinal statements, ذكر المقالات, and composing books on confessional groups and religious communities. يصنفون في النحل والديانات. His aim was to write a better example of such a book. Moreover, the titles of maqalat books from the second half of the 3rd century strongly hint at an awareness that they belong to an established tradition. Abu Isa al-Warraq, who died after 250, refers to his own lost work as our book in which we describe the doctrinal statements of the people and their disagreements. مقالات الناس واختلافهم. The wording of this description of contents cum title is clearly reflected in the title of Ashʿarī's later كتاب مقالات الإسلاميين واختلاف المصلين. The doctrinal statements of those who profess Islam and the disagreements of those who perform prayer. Between the two, Abu al-Qasim al-Balkhi, who died in 319, called his work كتاب مقالات فرق أهل القبلة, the doctrinal statements of the factions of the people who pray in the direction of the Qibla. These are just titles. We often do not know what the contents would have looked like. Nevertheless, the consistency here suggests that Maqalat book was a recognizable concept already in this period. The extant Maqalat books are quite different in formal terms from works like Shahrastani's Milal and Baghdadi's Farq. They are not broad taxonomical surveys of differences between discrete factions. Moreover, all known examples are much earlier. Indeed, the latest extant example is Ash'ari's. And there do not seem to have been many more after him. Although, as we will see, Maqalat books did not come to incorporate lists of factions, especially of the Shīʿa and the Khawarij. They were overwhelmingly concerned, and perhaps were originally only concerned, with cataloging disputed questions in Kalam and listing the diverse opinions that existed on those individual questions, recording them in highly technical language. As Van S. argues, their main function was probably to survey Kalam discourse in a way that was useful for practitioners, either as reference works or pedagogical tools. As such, he observes they are not really heresiography at all, but doxography. Indeed, in formal terms, Maqalat books closely resemble late antique philosophical doxographies, such as Placita Philosophorum of Pseudo-Plutarch. They would probably be, if you have any questions, please ask. They would probably be better referred to in English as Islamic theological doxographies. There is less evidence that Firaq book was a category term already in the period we are interested in. Certainly it was used in Arabic before it made its way into European languages, but much later. Muhammad Jawad Mashkur preceded his 1963 edition of Sa'd ibn Abdullah al-Qummi's, who died in 300, Kitab al-Maqalat wal-Firaq, with a discussion of the books composed concerning the factions of the Shīʿa. الكتب التي ألفت في فرق الشيعة. He in turn could refer back to a similar list compiled by Abbas Iqbal in Persian in 1941. These lists contained several, mostly lost works, bearing the title Firaq al-Shīʿa, that had been recorded already by Najashi, who died in 450. That hints at the possibility that their authors were working within a recognized tradition, but Najashi does not group them together. Indeed, no author of the period refers to them as a group of works in a way that makes it clear that a specific genre of writing is intended. The extant Shīʿī Firaq books, such as Nawbakhti's and Qummi's, are primarily occupied with surveying the historical disputes among the Shīʿa over the succession to the imamate and describing the factions that arose as a result. As such, they are not broad surveys of confessional differences on the model of Shahrastani's Milal either. Wider doctrinal concerns enter only and in a relatively unsystematic way. Wider doctrinal concerns enter only and in relatively unsystematic way in the case of groups that held beliefs deemed to be ghulu, which means extremism, which we might translate in this circumstance as transgressive Shi'ism, and to a far lesser extent when these ideas are discussed. There is also an example of a Mu'tazili Firaq book, Pseudo Nashi's Usul al-Nihal, which resembles the Shīʿī tradition in many ways. It too is about the factions that arose in response to disputes over the imamate. On the whole, Firaq books and Firaq material will be discussed using these terms. Major divisions and factions. Subsection 2, Section 6, Subsection 2, Major divisions and factions. The texts studied here do not have an entirely consistent nomenclature. I have seen this word many times, but I still don't know what it means. The devising or choosing of names for things, especially in a science or other discipline. In other words, it is name. Nomenclature means name. There is no need to use such complicated term. The text studied here do not have an entirely consistent nomenclature. Nomenclature. How is it pronounced?
Nomenclature.
Nomenclature for the groups in which they divide the Islamic community. Most commonly at the top level of the taxonomy, the largest groupings, i.e. the Shīʿa, the Khawarij, the Murji'a, and the Mu'tazila, etc., are referred to as asnaf, literally divisions, singular sinf. Sometimes, however, sinf is also used for the next taxonomical layer, i.e. the numerous smaller groups into which the larger groupings break down, although the term firqa, literally faction, plural firaq, is more usual here. Less often, we find other terms, such as ta'ifa, party, madhab, school of thought, or nihal, allegiances, singular nihla, which sometimes approximate to firqa, but sometimes seem to have different connotations. In the below discussions, I have tried to be sensitive to the terminological variety wherever possible, but sometimes it is necessary to stick to certain terms in English for clarity's sake. Therefore, in general, the large groupings, i.e. the Shīʿa, the Khawarij, etc., are referred to as major divisions. The Shīʿa are often then split into the Imamiyya or Rafida, the Zaydiyya, and the Ghulat. The Arabic word used here is once again usually sinf, but I render these as subdivisions. The smaller groups, most often firaq in the sources, I refer to throughout as factions. The particular faction names, and even sometimes the names of the major divisions, vary from text to text. Many of them were originally intended to have negative connotations, and many are used in this way in the sources. Despite this, I almost always follow the names used in the sources and provide clarification rather than trying to impose consistent names or find more neutral terms. For example, where Ashʿarī refers to the Imami Shīʿa as the Rafida, the rejectors, I follow his usage, although elsewhere the same group is referred to by the more neutral Imamiyya, Imamists. Section 7. The Corpus. The list below covers the main heresiographical texts and doxographical works examined in the study, in roughly reverse chronological order. More detailed descriptions of all these works are available in Van S 2011. The goal here is mainly just to provide the necessary background information. The list includes both extant and lost works, but only those lost works from which marked citations concerning the Shīʿa are or might be preserved appear here.